We're here at the Dedelic Days and talking about the Devil's Man. It's an adventure from Dedelic, and what is Devil's Man about?
The Devil's Man is about two women, actually. This sounds very ironic. Who live in the 19th century in a fictional English seaside town, and they are confronted with a murder mystery that they have to solve. And one of them is a criminal, and the other one is trying to solve this murder mystery that is happening in their hometown. And mostly it is about those two and how they start to clash throughout the story.
But there is something special about this adventure is that there are a lot of decisions in this game, and you have to decide where you want to go or who you follow. And what is the reason for having this approach?
I wanted to take give the player more influence on the story. And I didn't only want to make this in dialogues where you just say, I want to lie to this character, I want to say the truth, for example, like a binary decision. But I also wanted to get this, because it's an point-and-click adventure game, also into the puzzles. So if I solve a puzzle in a certain way, then this might have different consequences, how people view me as a character, if they like me, if they don't like me. And so whenever I solve a puzzle, I will always characterize myself, the player character. And that was very important to me, to make the puzzle solving a kind of role-playing game in a way. For example, if you play as Emily, the criminal in the story, she can be very immoral. She doesn't have to care about other people. Or she can try to be act very morally, but then other people take advantage of her. And this is also something that is reflected in the way how she solves her problems, of course. And not only how she talks to people, but how she deals with her own problems. So it's basically a role-playing game in a way. And it makes you and your thought process about puzzles more closely connected to the story.
Are there still typical elements of an adventure game in this game?
Of course, as I said, there are puzzles. There are some puzzles that have only one solution, but there are also puzzles that have multiple solutions. And as I said, you can do different things to solve those puzzles, which have different consequences. Basically, you can say it's a mix between what we did earlier, what Dedelic did before, like the Deponia games, with very typical puzzle solving, and what Telltale does with decision making. Only that we try to combine them and have them as equal partners in a way in the same game.
Can you give us an example of such a decision or puzzle decision?
For example, when you play as Adelaide later in the game, she investigates a crime scene. And there she finds evidence that points to Emily somehow being connected to that crime. And you can then decide whether you want to show this evidence to the inspector who investigates the crime scene. And then Emily would become one of the suspects. Or you can decide to forge evidence, to create fake evidence, then give it to the inspector, and then in a dialogue puzzle explain to him why you think this is relevant evidence. Then he will get the wrong evidence. You would harm the investigation, so Adelaide would harm her own storyline, but you would help Emily, on the other hand, that she won't become a suspect, and she can, you have her back in a way, and she can do things more freely than otherwise.
And there were two girls as main protagonists. Was there a decision before to having girls or women as main actor?
Yes, when I wrote the concept for the game, it was about two women. For me, the story was a lot more interesting with those two, because if I had chosen to have two men, it would be very, very generic and average. A lot of games are about men in the main roles. And if I had chosen to have one man and one woman, there would be a strong risk that people would interpret a lot of love interest thing into that, and I didn't want that as well. I wanted to make a game that was about a relationship between two people.
So in a point-and-click adventure, you get often this inventory puzzles where you have to combine items, and sometimes it's about that you talk to people and you find the right way to talk to people and find the solution to a puzzle. But these decisions, I think it's not used very often in a classical adventure. So, was there a reason why to include these kind of decisions to make a change to other adventures?
Yes, I didn't want to have this. A lot of adventures are stuck in a way how it used to be in the 90s. And there are more and more adventures coming out who try different new approaches and make things fresh again. And this was my approach, to make things a bit more fresh again. So that was important to me. As I said, I wanted players to feel as part of the story, stronger part of the story. And decision making is a very strong tool to do this. But it's also a very hard thing to do, because for one, there's always the risk that you start to produce a lot of content that people will never see because they choose differently, and then they see only 50% of what's in the game. And we would have to produce all this content. In the end, for usually this content could be used for, let's say, a 20-hour game, and then the player only sees part of it. And if we don't do it right, the game would be only half as long as that, and then people would complain that it's too short and they didn't see everything. Another risk is that people feel like they're missing out on something. So there's a lot of concept work you have to put into it, and it's really hard to get things right and to keep it satisfying, to keep all the decisions and all the variations you take satisfying, and so that people don't feel like they're missing out on something. So there's a reason why that's not done very often. And but as I said, it's what I choose to do, and it's a lot of fun, and I learn a lot while doing it. And I hope there will be other games that try the same later.
So there are a lot of branches in the story?
It gets more and more throughout the story. In the beginning, everything is very similar, with small variations, but the closer I come to the end, the more it will vary, because the more decisions I make, the more things can get affected, the more consequences can show up at some point. So that was my trick, to keep the game length still very interesting, long enough, but also have the decisions as a meaningful part of the game. So if I had chosen to have every little decision branch into a totally different scene and everything, then the game would be only 1 hour long and no one would buy it.
You talked about that it's a mixture of the classical adventure and the approach of Telltale. What do you think about the games Telltale is developing?
I really enjoyed the Telltale games a lot. I haven't played the newest ones. I played the first Walking Dead season. I played The Wolf Among Us. And it's very interesting what they're doing. And I like that they keep on iterating on what they're doing. So each series they release tries something a little bit new, and they try to develop more different approaches to the whole thing. So this is a very clever thing, and hopefully I get to iterate on that game as well later on, and make even more interesting and more complex things than we did before.
When we can expect The Devil's Man?
The Devil's Man will be released for PC and Mac in late summer this year, 2015.
Have you ever thought about getting adventures to console?
Probably. Could be.
Okay, thank you.